Hi guys, and happy Thursday. Today is May 21st, and this is for Math 1. Today we're going to be talking about compound interest in situations again, but this time we're going to be focusing on our using compound interest that's not just annually. So you may not have noticed, but all of the situations we've talked about have been annual, only annual. But now we're going to talk about what happens if it's compounded more than annually. What does that even mean? Well, first of all, to compound annually means once per year they're taking the interest, once per year, versus compounded monthly would mean once per month they're doing the interest. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at today. So let's look at our first example here. Okay, and let's see if we can write an equation. So it says you invest $2,000 in an investment that earns 6% interest compounded quarterly. So let's look for our important information like we did before. First things first, does say compounded, which means, of course, we're going to end up using our y equals a times b to the x, right? It's got to be exponential because it's compounded, okay? That's the first thing. Second, they give you the 200, which is the a value, right? So my a value is, 2,000. And then they say that the interest is 6%, right? Earning 6% interest. Now here's where we need to kind of pause for a minute because it is quarterly. So that means quarterly, think about a quarter. There are 4 quarters in a dollar. So there are 4 quarters in a year. So that 6% is split up over 4 quarters that you have in that year. So I'm going to take that 6% and I'm going to divide it by the 4 because there are 4 quarters in a year. So this is quarterly. There's 4 quarters in a year. So I'm going to divide that 6% up by those 4 quarters. So when I do that, I do 6 divided by 4, and that gives me 1.5%. That's how much it's actually going up each quarter. Okay? Now we're going to go back to what we did before. So remember, we always start with our 100%, which is our original, right? And I'm earning. This part's the normal part. The earning would be addition. And it's 6%. I'm sorry, 1.5% that we just found. Don't want to undo the work we just did. So then that gives me 101.5%. And then I'm going to write that as a fraction. Remember, 101.5% means 101.5 divided by 100, which when I divide that gives me 1.015. That is my multiplier. There you go. Okay. So then now we can plug it into our equation here. So I have y equals, my a value was 2,000, times my b value was 1.015. And right here you have a couple of options, okay? So you either can leave it as x, but if you do that, remember we're counting quarters, so you need to write down where x is the number of quarters. It's not the number of years, but the number of quarters. Normally it's the number of years. Or the other thing that I could do is I could just rewrite it as y equals 2,000 times 1.015. And then you can think of how many quarters are in a year. Well, there's 4. So if you were to tell me it's 4 years, I would do 4 times 4. Or if you told me it was 5 years, it'd be 5 times 4, right? So I could also just put 4x. I'm going to multiply by 4 because there's 4 quarters in every year, where x is number of years. So either one of these are correct, but you need to specify what your x represents, okay? So I'll take either one of those, but you got to specify what your x represents. Okay, so it's very similar to what we already did. The only difference now is splitting up that cost between however many pieces it has. So this one was quarterly, that's 4. And then paying attention to that exponent there. Okay, let's look at another example here. So for this next example, says you invested $4,400 for 2 years at a 7.3% compounded monthly. Okay, so again, we're looking for our important information. So first things first, it does say compounded. So that's going to tip us off to the fact that we're using our good old y equals a times b to the x, right? That's the first thing. Okay, then you notice that it says you invested $4,400. So that's my A value there. That's what I started with. So my A is going to be 4,400. And then they give me information that it is compounded monthly, 7.3%. Okay, so I have the 7.3% and it's happening monthly. Okay, so we got to think about this. I have 7.3%. This is not over a whole year. This is happening monthly. So how many months are in a year? Well, 12. So I'm going to have to take that 7.3% and divide by 12 to be able to find out how much it's actually happening per month. Okay, so in my calculator, I'm going to go 7.3 divided by 12, and I get not a perfect number, so I'll just go like this, approximately 0.6, and I'll show you what I got here. So you can see there, it's 0.6083333. I'm just going to use that 8 to round the 0 up to a 1. Okay, so 0.61 approximately. Okay, percent, don't forget your percent. Remember, we're still in percents here because this is percents. Now I'm going to write it as a decimal. Don't get confused because you have a decimal and a percent. Don't get confused. So that's 0.61 out of 100, right? That's how we write a decimal. So then if I were to divide that, I would get 0.0061. Okay? All right. Now, this is my multiplier. So my B value is 0.0061. That's my B value. And so now I can write my equation. So y equals, A was 4,400, B was 0.0, oh my goodness, I never even added. Sorry about this, and I'm sure you guys will probably make some issues like this too as well. So remember, we also have the 100% original. This is one of the biggest mistakes that people make. So it's a good thing that I fell into the trap so you can see how often that this happens. So I'm earning that 0.61%, right? Here. So that gives me 100.61%, which I could write as 100.61 over 100, which is 1.0061. Okay, so I want to point this out to you. So look, if I did forget to do this after, I can also add 1, because after I turn 1 to a decimal, 100 into a decimal, it becomes a 1. So I could also add in the 1 if I need to later, okay? So just so you, in case that happens to you, if you make that mistake as well of skipping that step, you can kind of jump to there, okay? But I really shouldn't have done this here. I should have waited until here, okay? Very common mistake. Good thing you saw me do it, because I know many people will make the same mistake. So 1.0061 as my B value. Okay, remember we have 2 ways of writing it. So I put to the X, but this would be where X is the number of months. That's one option. Or I could write it the other way, right? Y equals 4,400 times 1.0061. And then how many months are in a year? Well, there's 12. So if I told you that it's 5 years, I would do 12 times 5. Or if it was 6 years, I'd do 12 times 6. So I put 12x there, where x is the number of years. Okay, so you can do it either way. Now I want to pause here because they actually tell you how many years. There's 2 years. So that means that I need to still go one more step forward and find out how much that actually is. And again, it doesn't matter which way you do this because it's going to come out the same. Okay, so I go y equals 4,400 times 1.0061. So either way, if I want the number of months, it's 2 years. So 2 years, there's 12 months in a year. So it's 12 times 2. If I put it in here, it's still 12 times 2. Either way. So that's going to be 24 up here because 2 years is 24 months. So then I put that in my calculator exactly like that. I'll show you as I type it in so you can see it. So just like that. Okay, so you can see it's just like what's on the page. And then that gives me $5,091. And then this is cents, right? So we only want to use 2 decimal places. Notice that after the 3, there's a 5. So the 5 is going to make the 3 round up to a 4. So this would be how much money I would have after I invested it for 2 years. Okay, so you got to do the equation first, of course, on all of these, but pay attention. If they give you a time length, then you got to go in at the end and substitute that in. Okay, all right, let's try another one here. Okay, so it says you borrowed $30,200 for 5 years at an interest rate of 15.6%, and it's compounded semi-annually. Okay, all right. So let's look for our key stuff again, okay? So compounded, again, we know that that means that we're going to use our y equals a times b to the x, right? That part we know, okay? And then it tells us that we borrowed 30,200, so we know that's going to be our a value. That's what we start with, okay? And they tell us that the interest rate is 15.6 interest rate, and it's semi-annually. So that means I have my 15%, 15.6%, and it's done semi-annually. So what does semi mean? Semi means half. So that means every half year, which is 2 times a year. So I'm going to split this up between the 2 times per year. This is semi-annually. And So then when I do that, then I'm going to divide that. So in my calculator, I put 15.6 divided by 2, and I get 7.8%. So that's how much it's happening each half year. Okay, so then I go back, and I start with my original 100%, just like normal, always. And since it's interest, that means it's adding, because it's interest, adding on money that I'm going to have to pay them back, 7.8%. So that gives me 107.8%. And 107.8% means 107.8 out of 100. So when I divide that, I get 1.078 as my multiplier. That's my multiplier there, 1.078. Okay, so then I'm going to write my equations. So y equals a, which is 30,200, times b, which is 1.078, to the x. Now remember, if I leave it as x, then that means where x is the number of semi-annuals, which is a little weird to say, which is why I probably better to write it the second way, but it's the same. The other way, remember, is 30,200 times 1.078. And then semi-annuals, there's 2 of them per year, so that's going to be 2x, where x is the number of years. So this one you have to think of before you substitute it in for x, and this one, the 2 is already there, okay? Notice, by the way, it does say 5 years, so that means we got to find out what that actually is now. Doesn't matter which one I use, so y equals 30,200 times 1.078. So semi-annually, if there's 5 years and it's happening twice per year, that's going to be 10. Or if you put 5 in here, 2 times 5 is 10. Either way, still going to be 10. So I just put that into my calculator. Again, I'll show you just so you can see. So 30,200 times 1.078 to the 10th power, and I get 64,002 and 2 decimal places because it's money. The 8 here is going to make the 4 round up to a 5. 15 cents. There's my final answer. Okay, so just pay attention if they do give you a number of years. And I'll just go back really quickly on this problem. I didn't label it, but it's a good idea to label here for your notes that this is because there are 12 months in a year, right? That's why I put 12. So it's good to see that in our notes. Okay, let's do one more just to make sure we're doing okay. So we got to look for our important information. As it says, your uncle charges you 13% compounded semi-annually to lend you $155. What a jerk, your uncle is charging you interest and compounded semi-annually. Pretty jerky of your uncle. But anyways, so it's compounded. So then we know that that means y equals ab to the x because it's compounded. Okay, and then he's lending me $155, so that's my A value. And then says charging you 13% for semi-annually. This is the money I'm gonna have to pay him back. Okay, so I have 13%. I have to split that up over semi-annually. So remember, if it was quarters, I'd split it into 4 because there's 4 quarters in a year. If it was months, I'd split it into 12 because there's 12 months in a year. If it's semi-annually, I split it into 2 because there's 2 half months in a year. So I'm going to divide by 2, which gives me 6.5%. That's going to happen every half year. Okay, so this is because it's semi-annual. Okay. All right, so then I have my original 100% again. And he's charging me this, so this is money I'm getting tacked on to what I have to pay him back. He's charging me 6.5%, which gives me 106.5%. And then if I write that as a fraction, that means 106.5 out of 100, which when I divide gives me 1.065. So there's my B value. 1.065. So I'm ready to write my equation. Y equals A value is 155, B value is 1.065 to the X. If I write it that way, then it's where X is number of semi-annuals. Or remember, I can write it the other way. Y equals 155 times 1.065. And then there are 2 semi-annuals in a year. It's half of a year. So I could put 2x, where x is the number of years. So remember, either one of those is correct. Okay, and now since it doesn't give me how many semi-annuals I'm actually doing here or how many years, that means these are my answers, these 2 equations, whichever one you want to give, but you got to tell me what x represents. Okay, so just adding a little bit more on to what we're doing. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Google Classroom, Remind, email, whatever you need. Have a great day, guys.